everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss about home digital diagnosis systems. Uh, we have our world famous speaker, Professor Rob and Professor Edwards. So how you want to analyze Professor Edward today's topic?
Well, this is a particularly important topic because I'm working right now on a policy paper that addresses this issue. It's a policy paper on moving from a sick care system to a real healthcare system. Currently in the United States and frankly around the world, we have a sick care system. Somebody gets sick and then you debate about who pays for the bills. Do you pay indirectly through your taxes with government? Do you pay through an insurance company? Do you pay out of pocket? But there are not a whole lot of incentives for you to keep healthy. And frankly, for technological reasons, we haven't been able to head off a lot of the problems that serious health problems people have. But with exponential technology, that's changing. And there are 5 developments that really point to an actual healthcare system in the future. And what we're talking about today is the middle element, the crucial element to that healthcare system. First point is that in the year 2001, the human genome was first sequenced. In fact, Craig Venter's headquarters, who was the guy who sequenced it along with the government, is literally 6 miles from where I'm sitting right now. It cost $100 million approximately at that time, not including capital costs. In 2007, it cost about $10 million to sequence a human genome. Today, it's under $1,000, meaning we can sequence individual genomes and we can see all the sort of propensities somebody might have for a disease or for an ailment or whatever it happens to be, maybe sickle cell anemia, maybe Tay-Sachs disease. I can go down the list of these sorts of things. Blood analysis, we're getting more and more able to understand how human blood works and so forth. So that's the first element, is being able to sequence the genome. Second, the analytic tools for understanding our biology and the biology of individuals and not just huge groups is getting better and better with analysis. This is something, this literally was just posted a couple of days ago. Artificial intelligence can now predict who will develop dementia with 92% accuracy, breakthrough study reveals. I'm holding this up to the screen for anyone who's watching. That literally just came out a couple of days ago. We're getting better and better. A friend of mine who worked just down the road from me at the National Institutes of Health moved to Boston recently to oversee their artificial intelligence to analyze MRIs and scans of the sort of middle body to be able to understand possible correlations. We have the Watson supercomputer has done that sort of thing as well. So we have the analytic tools more and more and getting better and better to understand biology. Now, here's where these devices come in that you are talking about. We're talking about today. More and more, we're able to have real-time monitoring of our health. I mean, everybody with a smartphone now can tell how much they're exercising. We can basically, I can't do it on this particular one, but we can do our pulse, we can do our blood work and so forth. More and more, for example, people who have diabetes can wear a monitor and it tells them where their sugar is up or down or whatever, and when they might need to have an injection, which it can do automatically. My late sister, who unfortunately had diabetes, almost died earlier than she did because she had a diabetic stroke when she was driving a car. Fortunately, it didn't cause an accident. But the point is, if you have these wearable devices, you'd be able to tell that that's coming very soon. So these wearable devices are incredibly important. What you're going to be seeing is not only an improvement in these devices, the home testing, you're going to see implantable devices. So basically, you can monitor everything from electrolytes to blood platelets to you name it. This is the key to a real healthcare system in the future. The fourth point is real-time monitoring. So, for example, you can have this device is not just telling you right now what your pulse is or what your electrolytes are, whatever. You have real-time monitoring that can be broadcast and hooked up to an artificial intelligence So if it looks like all of the elements in your body are pointing to a heart attack, the medics can be to your door before you even know it. That's the kind of system that we're talking about in, say, the next, I'm predicting maybe the next 10 years. But it all depends, of course, on these home analytic tools becoming better and better and more improved. The fifth element, by the way, that's the real-time monitoring, so we can head off these sort of things. I talked to, for example, I just talked about artificial intelligence being able to predict dementia. Well, the fifth element is, of course, prevention. Earlier this year, another study came out showing that using the CRISPR-Cas9 genetic editing tool, 2.0 as they like to call it, to turn off the expression of tau proteins in neurons. What that means in English, okay, is that it's the clumping of tau proteins in neurons in the brain that's associated with Alzheimer's. So researchers now experimenting with how to turn off the production of the tau proteins in neurons that cause Alzheimer's. So if you see that you have you have with 92% accuracy, you may be susceptible to Alzheimer's, in decades to come. Well, you turn it off. You saw in 2018, researchers were able to sequence the enzyme telomerase. Why is that important? Well, every time your cell reproduces, the telomeres on your chromosomes get shorter and shorter and shorter. And then when they disappear, your cells stop reproducing, essentially. And that's what we call aging. So telomerase is the enzyme that keeps the telomeres from shrinking. So we now have sequenced the enzyme that can literally keep your telomeres from shrinking, that can slow or even prevent aging. That's a real healthcare system. That's going from a sick care system to a healthcare system. Central to that, for individuals, not just for 87% of people who are between 30 and 40 and so forth, but for you as an individual, for all the listeners, it's those monitoring systems that you're going to have in your home or implanted or wearables that are going to be able to control your healthcare and tell you what the best thing is. So I'm hoping that the talented people around the world who want to get into the economy, who are listening on this forum, will consider this. And perhaps they're going to be the Steve Jobs who creates a system in which I can subscribe to it. So I will have their wearables or their home monitors. And so I can basically live to, whatever the age is and be healthy. That's how important these home devices are.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Edward. Professor Rob, one thing, like example, this kind of home devices, I believe it's available in first world, in USA. But what do you think? Like we know, example, in Malaysia, there are many diabetic patients. In Malaysia, there are many asthma patients. Even in the COVID-19 situation, many things happening. Even I believe that we need oxygen even. We need a nebulizer and this kind of things. But what do you think the industry, this kind of instrument future, especially if you want to give some insight about this business analysis and what will happen next few years, especially?
Well, one of the things that has to happen for emerging economies, because Edward really talked about what's going to happen in a developed country, and mostly for folks that are reasonably well off. The equipment we're talking about, whether it's embedded or worn, is relatively expensive, and so the homeless population probably isn't going to get it, at least not initially. Lower socioeconomic levels probably aren't going to get it, at least not initially. And the problem, of course, is when you put in place a monitoring system, any monitoring system, you want it to be inclusive, because if you wanted to do something like track a pandemic's movement through a state, you can't just monitor the people that are reasonably wealthy. You've got to monitor the people that aren't, because they could be the spreaders. And so the difficulty comes down into trying to make this stuff less expensive. One of the initial medical trials that I was briefed on about a decade ago was done with Cisco and with a company called Neopina, and they developed a neonatal monitor that, instead of costing thousands of dollars, cost about $10. And because a lot of children were dying in South Africa, which is where this was implemented, due to a lack of neonatal monitors. This solution was put into place. Now, it wasn't as comprehensive as a multi-$1,000 piece of equipment, but it monitored what needed to be monitored and could alert if the child was in distress. It was wireless. It didn't need a lot of infrastructure to put in, because that's the other issue you've got to think through is you've got to have a technology that doesn't require a tremendous amount of infrastructure, because that infrastructure doesn't exist. If you're out in a village someplace, you just don't have the people even to maintain the infrastructure, even if you could afford to install and put it in place. And so the solution was designed specifically for an area that didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot of infrastructure, and it rolled out just fine in partnership with a large company. That's probably what needs to happen in emerging economies as well. You partner with a company in country or out of country to develop a low-cost solution that hits the minimums. Now, the thing you also have to think about is data sharing. There are a lot of laws in every country with regard to privacy and patients. And the thing is these monitors don't work real well if they can't share the information and supply it centrally, so you know that you've got a serious problem and you've got to deploy resources to that area so you mitigate it. Once again, thinking about a pandemic and a sickness, you want to stop it at its source, not let it spread across city borders, let alone county, state, country borders. So you've got to be able to centrally collect this information and use a model like federated data to conceal the identities of the people supplying the information, but where you're still able to see if a sickness is sprouting up, be it diabetes or virus or whatever. But if it starts becoming endemic, and in an emerging economy, the kinds of things you're also looking for is sickness caused by water pollution, air pollution, something that can be man-made and cause a localized problem. And because if you don't know you've got that localized problem, by the time you respond, people are incredibly sick. Lead poisoning in particular can be nasty to get rid of once it sets in place. So you pretty much have to stand back and just let the people go through a very much shortened life cycle. So the goal with these sensors is to really create a network of people that are monitored, and then provide a centralized reporting structure so that when you've got a problem and that problem is spreading, you can address that problem before it exceeds your resources. And the goal, of course, then is to have these sensors or whatever you're using to monitor be cheap enough so that you can afford to give it to the entire population, so you get an accurate representation of that population and you can respond appropriately.
Thank you. Professor Edward, you are also some point discussing, and you do research about Asia Pacific. What do you think? Yes, 40% population live in Asia Pacific. Price is another important thing. And beside that, in the COVID-19 situation, we find that this kind of diagnosis thing is very important. Many people actually die. Even my family member actually died lack of these things in developing world. So what is your advice? What type of better strategy or policy we can develop, and what kind of corporation we can welcome for doing this kind of things?
Yeah, no, this is important. I'll sort of step back from my grand view of what's going to happen in the future, because it's going to come from various steps. To Rob's point, of course, is that most technologies start off as expensive and not very good, and then they get better and cheaper. I mean, 15 years ago, nobody had a smartphone. Today in the United States, something like 87% of adults have smartphones, and the smartphones are far, far superior than what we had 15 years ago. And you see that's the path of most technologies, whether it's personal computers or what have you. Rob made the very good point about certain kinds of neonatal monitors and the like. And that's always the thing. The COVID situation, of course, provides a wake-up call and an opportunity. If you're in the Asian Pacific area, for example, a government might basically look at ways of getting, say, some simple monitoring devices that are in fact inexpensive, just to track some basics, because it's a public health issue. It's not just a matter of me getting cancer in the future. It's a matter of right now. And I mean, I know we're doing this sort of thing in this country. It's interesting. My kids go to school, they have to wear the masks. And I was asking why, when they go into the cafeteria, they can't sit with whomever they want, with any friends. They're assigned to a seat. And I asked why. And the principal told me, well, it's because we have to keep track of who they're sitting next to. So if there is a positive test, we know, well, these are the people who are sitting together, and we can track them and test them. And then we've had a number of situations where one of my daughters was tested because she was in an art class sitting at a table with somebody who tested positive. So this idea of tracking really is crucial. And I think Rob is right about, look, if you're trying to develop a strategy, first you have to deal with some of the very basics. Okay, I was talking about cancer and dementia. I think those are going to be very important, especially for countries like Japan, where it's got the oldest population, average population in the world. They're really concerned about things, and that's why they've had some important reforms in their drug certification system there. But in less developed countries or emerging economies, I think it is important to focus on some of the fundamentals, which includes public health, which includes sanitation, and the like. And to the extent that you can get monitoring and data tracking, that's going to be very important. By the way, I'll mention one other thing, and Rob mentioned this as well, and the paper I'm working on, I discussed this. There is a serious issue of privacy. I want the best information that's going to help myself, my kids, my family, my neighbors out here, and the like. But I don't want my data to be abused. And that's one of the problems we have right now, just in general in this country and in other countries as well, as data is being abused it can be abused by government, or it can be abused by businesses, or usually a combination of both. And so there's going to have to be some serious thinking about security and what to do with the data, especially, by the way, when it comes to insurance. And that's a whole nother issue. Maybe we can get into that discussion in a separate round. By the way, the other issue is, for example, in this country, we talked, I think it was Friday, our discussion was on the 24-hour testing, the rapid testing for COVID versus the one that takes the molecular testing that takes maybe 1 to 2, 3 days to get. And so even there, for example, if you have a community and you simply have a central location where you can do that, it's not at home, but it's where you can have maybe regular testing. Right now in our school, they do have rapid testing. And so if there is an outbreak or somebody has it, they could rapidly test. And again, they have to do a follow-up. But the thing is, they'll know at least initially whether a bunch of people have it and can move fast. And then, of course, they have to do the other tests. But these are very important issues. I agree with what Rob has said about the needs here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Professor Rob.
Yeah.
Yes. There are some other things, like example, I see that you are sharing some video from Cisco. So like Cisco, definitely one of the largest companies. And what do you think? Like they can contribute in these industries, or the largest company like Cisco, how they can contribute for emerging economy, or how does it work?
Well, Cisco has a variety of programs specifically focused on these kinds of problems. They're of the companies I work with, they're the most aggressive with social responsibility type of efforts. They make an aggressive effort to try to deal with things like homelessness around their plant
Panda
site.
is a medical device company
and it's a major
specifically
portion
for
of
emerging
for them.
markets.
But here's the new
Our
Panda
first
thing.
product is
That's the neonatal monitor that you see there. That's relatively inexpensive, can be applied.
doing so, we needed to apply to competitions and challenges, one of them being the Cisco Prize. So we were very fortunate to receive that in 2016. The funding enabled us to iterate on our product and get to the next stage of where we were in our technology development. Having the support from Cisco validated the efforts that we were doing and certainly provided additional doors for funding.
So
That's great.
Cisco's
That's great.
got a
Yes,
program
Professor.
called the Digital Country Acceleration Program, which is a partnership program that they've implemented pretty heavily in a number of countries. I've looked personally at the implementation in Italy and in Korea, South Korea, and the goal of those programs is generally to provide capabilities, either medical or communication capabilities. Most recently during the pandemic, and helping schools and governments shift to remote work. But it's a unique program because what it does is it first builds a bridge to the country, and then the country itself drives whatever the related development or solution is. It's not vendor driven; it's driven by the country, and that's important when you move to various countries, because the U.S. vendors or vendors located out of country very often don't really understand the problems the country is experiencing or the priorities the country has. We tend to filter all that through our own frame of reference, and that makes it really difficult to create something that is that's viable in that country. And so this Digital Country Acceleration Program allows them to really take the country's needs first and develop a program around those needs and keep focused on those needs, as opposed to the typical focus on trying to move hardware or software. So it's a unique program in the industry, and it allows them to do things that others don't. You might recall that Bill Gates a few years back was at a conference, and they were with a bunch of other companies. They were talking about how do you sell technology into some of the emerging countries, and his position was, hey, we're not going to sell any technology until we solve the clean water, food, and medicine problems. I mean, people aren't going to be going out and buying laptops if they're dying. And at the time, he didn't feel that he could spin Microsoft to fix the problem, so he left Microsoft and went full time on his philanthropic activities, and so his foundation does that work. There was a lot of discussion at the time whether that was foolish or not, realizing that Microsoft has a ton more power than Bill's foundation was. A lot of people argued he should have done this while he was head of Microsoft. He argued that you couldn't balance the priorities of a company with the priorities of an effort like this and do it justice. Both arguments are valid. Cisco's clearly trying to showcase you actually can do that. But clearly Bill's efforts since he's left Microsoft have been quite a bit broader than any company has been able to do in terms of being able to address a broad spectrum of things, from education all the way across to a lot of the work that he's doing to mitigate national disasters and weather events. So it's an incredibly broad effort on his behalf. But in the end, if you want to fix any of these problems, it really has to start with the geography, and the solution has to be crafted to meet the needs of that geography. Otherwise, it fundamentally won't function. It'll have too much overhead. It'll require things the country doesn't have, and it'll stall pretty dramatically. The another effort that I was involved in with Cisco was one that had to do with putting in wells also in South Africa. And the reason the Cisco approach worked and other approaches did not was, again, Cisco looked at the problem on the ground, and the well solution was relatively low tech and came with an awful lot of training, so that the communities these wells were dropped into understood the issues surrounding, keeping waste and water sources separate, and being able to monitor and be aware of things that might contaminate the water source, which was happening in the past. They put in one of these modern wells. One, they weren't able to maintain them, and two, these wells would get contaminated pretty quick, and so the effort was undone within weeks of having the press event to announce it. The Cisco stuff hung in there and lasted, and is still in service today because it was low tech, and it came with training so the community could support it, and that training combined with the low tech approach allowed it to function and function very well. So that's really the thing you've got to think through here is, what's the need? What are the requirements of the geography? What are the resources you have available? And then crafting the solution to fall within those boundaries so that the solution can work beyond the initial precedent.
Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent point. Professor Ed, I think you want to add more with Professor.
Yeah, just I want to mention that since we brought up Microsoft and Bill Gates. He's been doing a lot of very innovative things indeed. I follow, of course, a lot of the situation in Africa, but this is applicable to Bangladesh. It's applicable to places in the Philippines, Indonesia, and so forth. For example, one of his projects was a toilet. And you might say, well, that's kind of basic, isn't it? We've had those around for quite a long time. But he was looking at developing one that would, really be sanitary, really be, recyclable waste, and would be somewhat affordable. So, okay, well, we've got this wonderful technology. Oh, how much does it cost? Well, it costs $500,000. Well, forget it. It's worthless. No, that was one of the interesting innovations he's been working on. The second innovation is water filtration. More people especially children, unfortunately, in less developed countries, will die from waterborne infections, diseases, pests, and as well as pests and so forth. And so one of the innovations he worked on and is still working on is water filtration. And that's important because if you look at a lot of the emerging economies, especially in Africa, but also in Asia as well, governments and organizations have poured millions, billions of dollars into these projects, these big projects, and they just haven't worked because you still have these very serious problems. So he was looking at more localized solutions that could deal with the whole community. A third thing I'll mention is not with Bill Gates, but with an American entrepreneur, Dean Kamen, who came up with the thing called a slingshot. And what it is since we're talking about technology, imagine something that's the size of like a small refrigerator like this, okay? And you can power it on almost anything. You could take elephant dung maybe and power it. And you can take the muddiest water and filter it so that you get a certain amount of clean drinking water. So this is not something that you need a big electric plant for. It's something, and he's working with the Coca-Cola company, by the way, which has the biggest distribution system in Africa to get this particular technology out to areas where you really have very serious problems. So those are some of the three examples. I want to mention one other thing, and I put this in the chat. For those of you listening, all you listeners who want a little bit of perspective, one of the big breakthroughs came in with the 1854 Broad Street cholera outbreak in London. And this was when public health really became public health. What happened is you would have these outbreaks of diseases, and cholera, of course, being one of the terrible ones. And you had an outbreak in London at that particular time, 1854. And a guy named John Snow decided to actually do a study based on data and to sort of see where are the cases, what is the timing of each case, and can we see any pattern? And he did. What he saw was, well, it seems that the outbreak is, if you kind of trace it back to when people were getting it and earlier and earlier and earlier, it came to one pump that was pulling out water that was, that had cholera, and it was infected with cholera. And it was that pump that was causing this outbreak to spread. And so, of course, if you just shut down that pump and say no one can use that pump, then the problem disappears. And in a sense, to give you a little bit of historical perspective, especially as Rob's talking about the importance of data and getting the data and being able to use it, it goes back to 1854, John Snow in London. So any of your listeners who want to get a little perspective and history, take a look at that cholera outbreak and what John Snow did. That really was, I think, the first great example of public health, aside from the Romans who, had very clean water, but they didn't have the science to understand why, it was keeping Romans healthy, that they were actually having clean water.
Thank you. This is really great discussion. I just want to share a few entrepreneurs, those who contribute more for developing world. Professor Edward, actually, this is second time you are discussing about toilet project, World Toilet Foundation with Mr. Jacksim. We are working closely with Mr. Jacksim. He is a very enthusiastic and positive entrepreneur from Singapore. So World Talent Economy Forum actually supporting his initiative because toilet is very important. And another one is Dr. Fazla Hassan Ahmed. He died. He is a founder of uh, one of the world largest NGO, BRAC. He also providing lot of solutions. Even he developed university, he developed hospital, he developed NGO, and these are the good entrepreneurs. Even I know that Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations also supporting their initiative. This is also important for developing world. Professor Rob, you are expert from different largest corporations. We also see from the developing world, when the largest corporation go any developing world, they actually change the economy, they actually change the ecosystem. They have many good things, they have many positive things. The positive things they integrated with the local ecosystem. Some point maybe the local national company, they can learn from them. So what do you want to share about the culture? Because I'm a big fan of multinational corporation culture. Let's say you are talking about Cisco, Microsoft, IBM. They have excellent culture, and when they go to developing world, they try to contribute in the economy. What do you want to share about them?
Well, often as a multinational forms, it has to develop competencies in each of the countries that it expands in. IBM, of the companies that remain, was one of the first companies to do that. When they built a plant, a major facility in the country, they would build it as if it was a localized business. They would integrate it with the community, and very often people would refer to that as refer to IBM as a local vendor as a result, and that was one of the reasons they've been around for over 100 years. That's not, unfortunately, all that common. Lenovo is another company that has been very diverse in terms of how it forms its entities, largely through acquisition. But its U.S. branch is very U.S. centric. Its Chinese branch is very Chinese centric, and it has branches in most large industrial countries, and those branches are staffed locally. That they are often a part of an acquisition that came to be locally, and the end result is they're able to better integrate on a global basis than other firms. The average way that a company goes multinational is they open up branches. The branches are initially mostly staffed by workers that are having to relocate from the U.S. to those branches, and they form, and they're not as effective as a result, because they're maintaining a more consistent culture internationally, but as a result, they're not as well integrated with the geographies that they've penetrated, and so they aren't as efficient as the companies that I've mentioned earlier. Cisco, ironically, is a company that expanded both through acquisition and organically. But how they've made the difference is, say, through their CDA program, which was designed to mitigate the issues that a centralized facility with satellites typically has. And so it depends on the company. That if you're going to work with a company in an emerging economy, one, you want to make sure they've got feet on the ground, that they're invested in the country significantly. You want to make sure you don't scare them off. There's a huge concern with a lot of companies right now that if they develop too much of a presence, that presence will be nationalized. That happened in Venezuela with the automotive industry, if I recall correctly, and that's created a lot of concern with regard to building up a large investment in some of the smaller countries, for fear that the government will nationalize the investment, take it away from the country, and they won't be able to recoup their investment. And so certain countries, probably because of past practices, have a heck of a time trying to get remote investment into their countries, because for the fear that investment is just going to get taken away and lost. So it requires an understanding of what a deep partnership will be on both sides, a willingness to invest on both sides, and a recognition that both sides have to get benefit from the result. Otherwise, the effort's going to fail. If the country is too aggressive on assuring their benefits, so the country doesn't make money, they're out. If the country is too aggressive on driving their initiatives, it won't be successful. It really does require you to look at the operational capabilities of both the country and the company, and confirm that both are willing to work on a partnership and do this collectively, and their individual agendas don't overcome the effort of it and kill it.
Yeah, excellent. Professor Edward, yes.
Yeah, just want to follow up a little bit on Rob's points. They're very good points, and I mean, one of the things I've discovered over the decades, not surprisingly, especially with the Index of Economic Freedom, is that the countries that do protect both the property rights of companies coming in and putting investments and the rights of their own citizens tend to be the ones that prosper most. And yes, you need some kind of a balance, as Rob has suggested here, but that's certainly one of the things. I want to mention also something very important, and that is learning. When a company sets up, let's say a multinational sets up in wherever it happens to be, Malaysia is fairly advanced, but let's take Philippines or Indonesia, or someplace that's not quite as advanced. Bangladesh could be another place. What happens, of course, is that the locals are learning. They're getting training in everything that it takes to be a modern, entrepreneur, or technical work, or what have you. And then what ends up happening is they can go out and, first of all, work for another company. They can start their own businesses. They really are basically bringing knowledge to the country. They're not just bringing some dollars so that you're producing widgets in Bangladesh or Malaysia or wherever it happens to be. You're bringing something much more important, knowledge. And now you have a population that can do more sophisticated work. And then, of course, since I know you like to talk about the synergy between corporations, business, government, and universities, educational systems, then you have these partnerships with the educational systems, with the universities, for example, where they're now training people who are going to go into these businesses and be the employees. I think I looked at Indonesia as one of the places that really sort of tried to pioneer in the last decade or so a learning system or an education system that was really geared to what they thought was going to be one of their key economic advantages. And that would be having a more technological based economy than, sort of a low level manufacturing based economy. So I think these are very important issues. And again, if you're thinking about partnerships between business, outside businesses, multinationals, and the education system in the country, this is very important.
Thank you. Professor Rob, some of the questions actually come from the audience. I believe Yes. Many questions you already covered, but it depends on you what you want to cover. There are a few questions from Monica Shams. Do you think that developing digital diagnosis requires a minimum knowledge user who has a basic understanding of medical science?
Hang on, let's. I can see the questions. Let's just do one at a time.
Okay.
We can. So yes, I think here in the United States we've got a large trial going on with Rana, which was a medical testing company that everybody and their brother thought was going to be absolutely fabulous, and it has failed rather spectacularly. It's being presented as a criminal fraud. That to a large extent, that was due to the fact that Rana's leadership were not medical doctors. You point to that underlying failure that they had. They just simply were not aware that some of the limitations they were being told, I'm talking about the leadership, were being told were at the time somewhat insurmountable. And they thought they were trivial. And it was that lack of medical knowledge that I think kept them from really understanding the nature of the problem, funding it appropriately before they went public, and then creating a more viable company as opposed to the train wreck that it became. So yes, much of what we're talking about right now would require a blended skill set. You have to understand the technology, and you have to have enough of an understanding of the related human condition, the medical technology or the medical capabilities that the world has, as well as the illnesses you're trying to address, to be able to craft a viable solution. Any gap in that knowledge base is going to cause you to make mistakes, and make mistakes at probably a catastrophic level. The big problem with another question is, what are the problems of developing a smart healthcare system? The big problem is data sharing. We can certainly capture the data reasonably well. The issue is now being able to share the data broadly enough so that the system itself becomes intelligent. The leading way we're doing this right now is deep learning systems, and deep learning systems require massive amounts of data to make them viable. And this lack of data sharing is creating a fairly significant problem with regard to being able to do this at scale. And I'm going to say that's probably going to be the big problem we're going to have going forward. That we can develop the sensors and we can lower the cost of the sensors, but we're hitting a wall with regard to data sharing. And that created a major problem with response to the coronavirus. It's creating an ongoing problem with regard to monitoring and catching the variants real time and being able to contain them, because we're clearly not able to contain the variants. And in a modern healthcare system with active tracking and tracing, we should be able to contain this. And the fact that we're not indicates we've got a serious data sharing problem. Going back to the beginning of the coronavirus. Which innovations have emerged in at-home medical testing? Well, a whole bunch. Everything from telemedicine, where you can put what is basically a robot in the home of the individual for monitoring and communications, all the way through to being able to do things like monitoring blood sugar real time, that can allow us to do things remotely we've never been able to do before. Relatively inexpensively, we can now put, I say relative compared to what it used to cost at a hospital setting, we can put in relatively heavy patient monitoring, respiration, heart rate, blood sugar, and we're beginning to be able to do much faster real-time testing, where the test goes out, the individual supplies the material, blood, urine, whatever, and then within the week they get back the results and know if there's a problem. And we're of course moving to be able to do a lot of those tests in the home or in the remote facility itself, which speeds the identification of illness and again speeds the response. What are at-home medical tests and how do they work? Well, we kind of just covered that. So there are a variety, everything from testing, your bodily secretions, to putting in place monitors to be able to report that your heart's fallen out of spec, your blood sugar's out of line, or that you haven't taken your medication regularly. That, by the way, the medication problem is much bigger than we often talk about. There are a lot of people that just fail to take their medication and they get worse, where they could have gotten better if they had taken it. Particularly true of some mental illness issues at the moment. So that kind of covers the questions, at least as I saw them.
Thank you. Professor Edward, one thing, even this is very important discussion, even Professor Rob and you actually bring many important topics. Like when we invite a multinational company, we have to understand their need, their requirements. We have to create win-win situations, both of the national perspective and global perspective. That is the way we can invite. One of the challenges, even I personally, I can understand, I can learn from World Talent Economy Forum. Definitely, I learned a lot from our speakers. Especially if I compare my corporate career, I find that in the corporate career, that is the major gap. Like many local business organizations, they do not understand what is the requirement of the global arena from the developing worlds. On the other hand, there is a massive information gap from the multinational company. That's why how they develop their strategy, how they go for joint venture, how they can go for collaboration. This is the gap. What do you think? How speakers like you, people like you, they can help local national corporations to teach them or guide them to cope up, or how they can cope up with the multinational company? What is your idea? I also want to get some input from Professor Rob as well, that how the national companies or local business organizations, they can cope up with international corporations.
Okay, this is a very good question. I just want to say a few things about Rob's points that and to the questions that were asked. There's always a learning curve, both for an economy and so forth, and for individuals. If you had said 40 years ago to the American public, everyone's going to have computers in their homes or in their hands, they'd say, no way, I'm not a computer engineer. But of course, what happened is people like Steve Jobs made it so simple that all you have to do is push a button, and even my 90-year-old dad knows how to use an iPad. Okay, I mean, that's pretty fantastic as far as I'm concerned. And data sharing indeed is absolutely crucial. Now, just mention something that because I'm working in this area and thinking about it, is the idea of buying and sharing data. In other words, if I share my data, I get a discount on my insurance, or I get a discount on something. In other words, purchasing data, and there's a whole issue involved in that. And I'm dealing with this with FDA certification. That's another topic we can have perhaps a discussion. But your other point is very important, because I've dealt especially with development in Africa and some other countries. And one of the problems indeed is a disconnect between a multinational company that comes in and says, well, we are from the United States, or perhaps Great Britain, or one of the major developed countries. France has a big footprint in Africa, for example. And so we're going to go in there, but the cultures are very, very different, not only from country to country, but within a country. If you go to India, saying India is like saying Europe, because there's different languages, different cultures, and so forth. There's not one thing, even though some people might think that's the case. And so multinational companies are starting to learn that you really need people on the ground who know the local situation and can help the locals understand, look, here's how they do this with the multinational, and basically saying to the multinational company, you have to adjust a little bit to what's going on locally. In a sense, think of it as, since we're talking about markets here, think of this as a market function. Think of this as a need. And for those of you, the talented folks who are listening to this around the world, who are listening to this forum right now in Asia, one of the things that you can do, one of the market niches you can pioneer, is to be the man or the woman who knows what's happening perhaps in your locality, and can basically work with a multinational, or even a national company in your own thing, in your own country, to basically help do the coordination so that things fit together properly. It's interesting, because if I always go back to history for some reason. I guess I like history. If you look at the Industrial Revolution in England, one of the big issues was for companies and localities to kind of work together with their cultures. For example, in Britain and in England, it used to be that people would kind of get up in the morning whenever they have to, but there was no set hour. If you're a farmer, well, you kind of get up with the sunrise and you go out and you milk the cows and do something like this. If you're talking about a factory, you have to be there at 9 o'clock, because that's when the assembly line starts. So there was a whole cultural change where you had people going around ringing bells around the town saying, it's 8:30, you have to get up because you have to be here at 9 o'clock. You can't be here at 9:10 or 9:15. So there was a whole sort of adjustment period that had to go on even in England for the Industrial Revolution. So sort of think about it like that you need individuals who can take the local knowledge and the knowledge of what the multinationals need, and basically be the bridge, the entrepreneur who pulls those cultures together. So I would say to multinationals who are listening to this show, you have to look in Malaysia, you have to look in Indonesia, you have to look in the Philippines, you have to look in these places, you have to find the talent and that can work with you locally, so that everything will mesh together, and it'll help the locals, it'll help the country, it'll help the multinationals.
Thank you, Professor Edward. Professor Rob, do you have any advice for policy development when we need this kind of diagnosis things, or this kind of technology desperately in developing world? What is your advice, especially for policy development, for welcoming this kind of corporation?
Well, one is I mean, if you're developing policies, part of the policy has to be to develop an infrastructure that can work with these companies. One of the big problems for a multinational working with an emerging economy is often the mechanisms required to get them done require a certain amount of graft and bribery. And if they don't require it, they can find themselves partnered with individuals that are criminal in nature, and if they get burned once like that, they'll exit the country and they won't come back, not for the foreseeable future. So creating a structure inside the country that is solid ethically, that won't cause problems for the company, and where they're working with people that say what they'll do and do what they'll say. So they're not caught short for believing somebody that had approached this as a way to scam the company and make a lot of money quick, with the understanding that the company probably can't do anything legally to recoup the money. The country has to set up a situation or an environment that's conducive for the company to work in country. If it's not safe for them, they're going to exit. I remember going into South America one time on a project, and I was required to have bodyguards. I was required, and you don't get to know the country if that's the case. I'm surrounded by bodyguards.
Yeah.
There's no place I can go to the hotel. I can go to the company site. I'm not allowed to go outside at all, and that means whatever I'm doing is not going to be well integrated into what the country needs, because I'm not able to experience the country. And so creating a safe environment for them to operate becomes a priority. And if you can't do that, then you probably shouldn't be partnering at this particular point in time. Because if a multinational gets burned, by policy, they will not go back into that country again for decades. And so you set back any joint effort significantly, and you can get blacklisted. I think Venezuela currently is largely blacklisted right now. Getting foreign investment into that country is almost impossible, and there are a number of Central and South American countries that are like that. So you've got to create a kind of a safe haven so that the country can operate, but still understand the problems that you have. And be able to work through them. It can't be just a walled garden kind of thing, because then they won't get the experience they need to craft the solution that the country requires. And so there really has to be an effort to create a safe but engaging environment for the country to operate in.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Professor Edward.
I just happened to have literally in my hands. I wish I had the Asian numbers right with me, but I did an analysis, and I completely agree with what Rob is saying. That the countries that one of the biggest problems in Africa, in fact, I'd say the biggest, is in fact corruption. The 5 or 6 leading countries with economic freedom have $65,000 approximately per capita income. Sub-Saharan African countries have $4,000 per capita income. The biggest correlation, which is why they are doing so badly, is in 3 factors. Judicial effectiveness in Africa is on a scale of 1 to 100 is only like 36% compared to 80% for the freest countries, 36 versus 80. For government integrity, it's something like 44% compared to 80-some%. And again, for judicial independence, where if you have a contract issue, you can go to the local judiciary. Again, it's absolutely stark. In the richest countries, it's almost 90%. In Africa, it's like 29% or something like that. The point is this: why would a company go into a country where they know they have to basically bribe everyone, they can't trust anyone, et cetera, et cetera? And the answer is they don't. And that's why the investment all goes to Korea, South Korea, Taiwan. Singapore has done an incredible job. Hong Kong, until recently, with the communists taking over, and other places as well. Because if they can trust not only the government to not steal their property, but they have a talent, you might say, a cadre that you can trust, then you're going to hire that person. You can trust that person, and that's going to allow the multinational to expand. It's going to help everybody in the country. So, I mean, that's for those listening in the Philippines and in Bangladesh and in Indonesia and some of these other places. You got to really get a handle on those issues, okay? If you want to have the multinationals come in and do more than the lowest level manufacturing, and really up your talent game, you might say.
Mhm. Thank you. This is really great discussions, and this week we have many interesting session. After the COP26, what is the economical impact? We will launch a series, and we will analyze that what is the economical impact and how the developing world get benefit after the COP26. We will work on that. Besides that, we have a debate, and this debate is very important. Already many universities they're really interested about World Talent Economy Forum debate. We already invite Professor Robs and Professor Edward for this debate. Actually, we want to arrange corporate debate. I can remember when I was in Westminster Parliament with English Speaking Union, they arranged a lot of corporate debates. Even in the Oxford Union and the Cambridge Union, I actively involved with these unions, and we find that this is very popular. Even in Malaysia and Asia Pacific, debating is very popular. So we want to give something different for our audience, and they really like our speaker, Professor Rob, Professor Edwards, and all of the speaker, those who contributing for World Talent Economy Forum. They really like it, and they are waiting for a excellent debate sessions. We have our debate academy, Asia Debate Academy. Already we train around 3,000 people in Asia. So hopefully your contribution will be very effective. Even if you have time, we want to organize corporate debate. Yes, so that is our objective.
Yeah, sure. Just I may not be able to participate in this debate because you mentioned it. I think it was in 1985. I debated at the Oxford Union, and it was
Excellent.
myself and Lord P.T. Bauer. If you are interested in international development, you have to read the works of Lord Bauer, the late Lord Bauer. And it was myself and Lord Bauer versus a member of Parliament and I think it was the Prime Minister of Somalia, debating international economic development. So I might not be able to do this one, but I want to
We
tell
will,
all
we
of your
will, we will
listeners.
arrange a series because
Yeah.
debating is so popular. Trust me, you people will join in the debate. Many university waiting. Many universities actually students like it. Even when we declared in the social media, many media also like this approach. So hopefully we will launch more debating, especially in different issues. It's a show debate. It's not, there is no winner or loser, but it will
It's
it
fun.
will bring some, yeah, definitely fun, and it will be great example for our students. And even after the COVID and this kind of challenges, maybe we can arrange offline conference and academy, like debate academy. So thank you everyone for joining today's session. I request all of our audience, please share our content with government, academy, and corporation. And beside that, we are taking some good initiative after these Rwanda sessions. We are training Rwanda students, youth communities, especially young entrepreneurs, women's. We providing training. There is another good news. We are in 600 jobs from Europe, especially in the healthcare industry for the developing worlds. So we provide them training. If they can fulfill the requirements, they can get a very good job in Europe. This is the way we want to focus on economical sustainability. We want to focus on economical things. Even we are inspiring many entrepreneurs. So I'm sure Professor Rob, Professor Edward can contribute. If you have any great plan, just share with us and execute it. I'm sure many corporations like this, Mr. Jack Sim, he's also very interested to join in World Talent Economy Forum. Personally, I communicate with Mr. Jack Sim in Singapore. Many local corporations, they are now interested to join in World Talent Economy Forum, and I want to give thanks to all of our speakers because they continuously support World Talent Economy Forum. That's why we are getting very good exposure. I directly want to go for concluding remarks. I want to request Professor Rob, what is your concluding remarks?
Oh, I get to go first this time. Okay, so the future of healthcare is remote diagnostics. I think that if this COVID virus has shown us anything, is we need to improve our monitoring substantially, and we need to reduce the movement of people that are sick, having them have to go to centralized places to get tested is problematic, both from a logistics standpoint and from a spread standpoint. If we can test people where they are, if we can provide medications and some type of medical care where they are, it reduces the opportunity for healthcare professionals to get sick, and it improves our ability to track things real time. Tracking and tracing in most countries, including the United States, is lagging the requirement rather substantially. And that's one of the reasons why we can't seem to get our arms around this particular pandemic, both in emerged and emerging economies. So this is the future, figuring out how to make it happen. That's the heavy lifting we're going to be seeing over the next decade or so. But I expect by this time next decade, a good chunk of the developed world will be heavily instrumented with regard to medical care, particularly in my age group and older. So it's an interesting area to explore. Recognize that bridge skills will be critical. Understanding technology and medicine will be the requirement for folks that are expanding in this area. And it wouldn't hurt to have at least a foundational knowledge of artificial intelligence, because many of the decisions will increasingly be made by computers, either by providing advice to the doctors that'll make the decisions, or actually making the decisions all on their lonesome, depending on the implementation and the stage we're in terms of the deployment. So it's a hot area, and one that could make us all a lot healthier.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Edward, what's your concluding remarks?
Yeah, just a couple of summary points here. First of all, this discussion shows how all of this technology is interconnected, because we've had shows on nanotechnology, and of course, nano implants are going to be important in the future for remote diagnostics. A lab on a chip is something that's already being developed and used for remote sensing in rural areas and emerging economies. And so we see how these technologies, artificial intelligence, I mentioned that literally artificial intelligence now seems to be able to predict Alzheimer's. All of these technologies, in fact, are interrelated, and the diagnostics, being able to get you the information from you as an individual, not just 87% of people between 30 and 40 or whatever, is going to be crucial in the future. The second point I want to make is we've discussed how a lot of this technology that I've been talking about is expensive, and at least it's going to come in initially in developed countries and for maybe more prosperous individuals. But ultimately, the technology, if you have an open system, is going to filter down maybe quicker. I mentioned that 15 years ago, nobody had smartphones. Now 87% of Americans have smartphones, adults, I should say. So as these things develop, they're going to sink down. A lot of times you do have to work at the basic level, especially for things like sanitation. The final thing I'll mention, because we're talking about talent here, you folks listening to me are going to be the entrepreneurs who pull all of this together. I can't say exactly what the model is going to look like. There's a whole discussion we could do on insurance and things like that. It's going to be the folks listening right now who are going to hopefully be like the Steve Jobs and the Bill Gates, who figure out how to pull all of this together and create a growing system where instead of having sick care, we have real health care. And this diagnostics that we're discussing are absolutely crucial to that system.
Thank you. This is really great discussions, and hopefully this week our audience especially enjoy many interesting sessions, including debates and after the COP26 impact in economy. So thank you, Professor Edward, for joining today's session, and thank you, Professor Rob, joining today's session. Another things, always, let's say Professor Donald asked me, you asked me about that I'm Professor Donald. Why? I said, yes, you can contribute for our academy, you can contribute for our university. So Professor Rob, if you want to be a lecturer, you can join, you can work with us. Professor Edwards, you also can join with us, because we are trying to creating job opportunity, creating new economy, and helping the developing world with our action. Whatever the things you are recommending, maybe everything we cannot fulfill, but the basic things, because we need to care about the economy of the developing world, we are trying to help him. So those who want to support World Talent Economy Forum, please support our initiative. Hopefully you can change the world with your initiative. Thank you, Professor Rob, for your continuous support. Thank you, Professor Edward, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Bye-bye and take care.
Mm-hmm.